Coming up, Steph Curry dazzles at Barclays Center during a thrilling Nets-Warriors matchup, and we take a look around the league at some familiar faces and some new developments. I'll recap all that and more after the theme music. What is up, Nets world? We're back here on the Believe in Nets podcast on the Believe Podcast Network. I'm your host, Erik Slater, Brooklyn Nets beat reporter for ClutchPoints.com. Hitting you with a solo pod today. Going to be recapping a thrilling Nets game last night, a loss to the Warriors. Also going to hop around the league and just give my take on some subjects that I've been really dying to talk about. But before any of that, if you do not already, make sure to subscribe to Believe in Nets wherever you get your podcasts. Go to my YouTube channel at Erik Slater NBA. If you enjoy my content, subscribe. If you like this video, like it, comment, anything you can do to engage. It's much appreciated. I'm almost at 1,000 subscribers. I'd like to push over that by the end of the season and just continue to grow this channel and create content in this space. So anything you guys can do is much appreciated. But going to get into a thrilling Nets loss last night to the Golden State Warriors, 121-119 at Barclays Center. A game that really had the makings of just a show on a Thursday night. There was a sellout crowd. It was recorded as the largest crowd ever at Barclays Center for a Nets game. So that just tells you, obviously, the draw of Steph Curry, the draw of the Warriors, and the Nets were on a 5-game losing streak entering this one. They were heavy underdogs, and as they have done against top competition in games recently and really this whole season, they were all over the Warriors out of the jump. They jump out to a 27-5 lead. They're playing super physical with Steph. There's a clear emphasis from Jordi Fernandez. Jordi put Keon Johnson into the lineup, replace Zaire Williams with Keon. And there was a clear emphasis of you are guarding Steph Curry. You are face guarding him everywhere he's going on the court. You are breathing down his neck on screens on and off the ball. We're showing two. And, as I said, when the Nets play this physical, this is what they can do sometimes. If opposing teams, no matter how good, are not ready from the opening tip, the Nets can jump all over you. We saw it with the Oklahoma City Thunder recently. We've seen it with other teams. And the Nets get out to a 27-5 lead in this one. They get out to, I think it was 35-15 at the end of the first quarter. And they're all over Steph. They're all over everything the Warriors are trying to do. They're hot from three themselves offensively. And it was really just, kind of a testament, obviously, to the intensity of this team will come out in some games, even when things haven't been going well. They've been, they've lost 5 straight entering this one. But the capability, the intensity, the ability to buy into a message that Jordi Fernandez was clearly harping on throughout the game. So it's looking really encouraging. There's thoughts. Is this going to be a game for that the Nets can claw away and the Nets can potentially run away with against this Warriors team that I think was 9 or 10-2 since they had traded for Jimmy Butler entering that matchup? But then Steph Curry happens, and Steph is able to shake loose. He's able to get going. Refs start calling fouls. Midway through the first quarter, Steph, Keon Johnson's covering him full court, really, like I said, just breathing down his neck. And Steph throws his shoulder into Keon's chest and gets an offensive foul. Steve Kerr gets a technical, but Steph's clearly frustrated. Steve Kerr's frustrated. The whole Warriors team is frustrated. Zaire Williams and Gary Payton got into it at the end of the first quarter, kind of a little scuffle. And from that point on, there was a little bit of a, course correction of the officiating in this game because the refs were not calling anything at the start of the game. I tweeted this was literally a definition of letting them play. But then they get the message from Steve Kerr, obviously. They start to call some fouls, which were fouls. And then Steph's able to shake loose. He's able to get going. He finishes with 40 points on 7 of 13 shooting from 3. And the Warriors come away with this one. And, this was just a spectacle and a show from Steph Curry at Barclays Center. And I don't want to spend too much time talking about a player that's not on the Nets, but this was just unbelievable. I mean, the things that he was able to do in this game when he was clearly frustrated early, with that offensive foul, with the way that the Nets were covering him, with the lack of calls from the officials, and it doesn't matter. He's able to break loose. The shot making off movement, the off balance shots, the quick release, the way that he's able to do this, it's really something that I'm not sure that we'll ever see again. And if you've had the chance to watch it in person, you realize and understand how special it is, just the degree of difficulty of what he's able to do. And also the way that he's playing and the way that he's moving off the ball, to be able to move as much as this guy does and be able to get these shots off balance from different angles and not not be short and have the juice in the legs from, often 4 or 5 feet behind the 3-point line to get these shots up there. It's really just something that's unbelievable to watch. And, Steph was killing the Nets in the second half of this game, despite their best efforts. And, the Warriors, after Steph had that offensive foul, he sat for the rest of the first quarter. Then the Warriors scored 40 points in the second quarter to cut the Nets lead to 5 at halftime. And the last shot is Steph Curry gets the ball with like 4 seconds left near the logo. He hits a turnaround 38-foot three from nearly half court off no dribbles. And it's one of the greatest shots that I've ever seen in person. The entire Barclays Center crowd goes into a frenzy. All of Nets Twitter was, not Nets Twitter, all of NBA Twitter and probably Nets Twitter too, was going insane over the shot. And it really just was, as I said, a spectacle and something that you're not going to see a lot, from opposing players coming into that arena. And it was evident in the way that this Barclays Center crowd responded to Steph. I said that this was the biggest crowd ever recorded at a Nets game. Every time that Steph caught the ball, there was just this palpable feeling, this shockwave of energy through the crowd, this anticipation. And if he did make a three, it was just an eruption, like the roof was going to blow off the place. So, Steph is doing what he's doing this year he's going to be 37 years old soon. The way he plays, the constant movement, as I just said, at his age, it's unbelievable. And there's not many players. I've never seen another player who comes into Barclays Center and draws this kind of response. I tweeted that out. A few other people threw some other players, like said Dwayne Wade, obviously Kobe back in the day. But, the intensity of the crowd, the response to Steph was really something special. And I said, obviously Steph put them away in this game, but the Nets were able to show some fight in the beginning of this game. And also the Warriors Steph, they lost Steph off an inbounds. He hit a three with, I think it was 1 minute remaining to put the Warriors up 10. He did the night celebration. All the Warriors fans, the little kids in Steph jerseys are going crazy. And the Nets did show some fight at the end of the game after that. They gave the Warriors and Steph a little scare. I don't think a team's ever come back from the night to beat Steph and the Warriors, but the Nets they forced a couple straight turnovers. They had a lay-in, they had an and one, and then Cam Thomas hit a logo three to cut it to 2 with, I think it was like 15 seconds remaining. But then Steph gets the ball, hits 2 free throws, and the game was really over after that. But the fight was impressive from the Nets. Jordi Fernandez commended the Nets for the fight that they showed in that game. And I do think that if you're a Nets fan who's just looking for an enjoyable basketball viewing experience, which much of this season has not been, it was a good night from that sense. The Nets play hard. You get a show from Steph, and they're able to pick up a loss, which, at this point is growing more and more important as we wind down the season and these tank standings are really coming into focus. So for me, it was during a season that's often been lethargic from the Nets perspective, or not from the Nets perspective, but just from in terms of the on-court product and there really being a juice in terms of what they're playing for. It was a joy to watch this basketball game last night. The defense, the shot making from Steph, the fight and the attempted comeback from the Nets, all of it was just really enjoyable for me. And I think everybody else in the arena, and hopefully all of you at home that got the viewing experience. But now the Nets have lost 6 straight games after that 7-2 stretch. And this loss tied them with the 76ers for the 6th spot in the draft lottery standings. And they're now also 1 game behind the Toronto Raptors for 5th. So, Nets, Raptors, 76ers, they're really in a bunch right there in that lottery spot from 5, 6, 7. And we'll see how, the Nets are able to finish this out for the rest of the season. We'll see if they start resting guys, but they are making some headway after they had put together that 7-2 stretch that really some people thought was going to result in them making a play-in appearance. So that's where the Nets are at with that. Talking about some of the Nets things we saw offensively in this game, I touched on the defense with Steph, but Cam Thomas came back. This was his 3rd game back from injury since he missed really almost 4 months. He missed 6 weeks with that hamstring strain. Then he came back for 2 games and he re-injured his hamstring during, I think it was a January 2nd win over the Milwaukee Bucks. And then he was out another 2 months. So it was in a very, very long time. And this was Cam's 3rd game back, and he scored 23 points. He was 8 of 18 shooting from the field, but he recorded a season-high 7 assists. And that was really the positive that I think a lot of people took from this game. Nick Claxton also had 10 assists and became the first starting center in Nets franchise history to record double-digit assists in a game. So that was really positive to see. But just focusing on Cam, the player who really has the ball more than anyone else on the Nets roster, season-high 7 assists in this game. And he came back for his first game back from injury was a loss to the Portland Trailblazers a few days back. And Cam put together 1 assist and 3 turnovers during that game. And Jordi Fernandez made some comments after the game when asked about Cam's performance, obviously, that it's great to have him back. We want to see him develop, playmaking, scoring, defense, all of those areas, and not really just being a scorer. So it wasn't him reprimanding Cam, obviously, by any stretch of the imagination, but there was a clear message of, we need to see a better process here in terms of the playmaking. And it was his first game back from injury, so you'd expect some rust, but you want the process to be correct, even if the shot making isn't right, even if there's some other things that are a little bit out of rhythm. You'd like to see the correct process. And then Cam comes back in this San Antonio Spurs game, the last game before this Warriors matchup, had 6 assists. And then this game has 7 assists, season high, 1 off his career high. So that's a positive, and it's nice to see Cam respond to the Jordi comments and, really, it seems like correct the process a little bit compared to what we saw in that Trailblazers loss. But then Cam is asked about, his 7 assists after the game, his 6 assists against San Antonio. And he was asked, have you changed your process? Do you think you're starting to see the floor a little bit better now? And Cam's response was pretty interesting. He said, I'm just going to read the quotes. There's nothing lost in translation. He said, nah, I've been doing that. They're just making it. That's how assists are. I pass it, and my teammates got to make it, and they're making it. So it goes on the stat sheet as an assist. So that was what Cam had to say. I posted that on Twitter. It's going viral. A lot of people obviously might think it's funny. They might agree with Cam. They might disagree with him. But from my perspective, this is where I, start to run into some issues with Cam's mindset, how he sees things, because, this statement that his teammates are just making shots now and he's always been a very willing passer, it's just simply not true. It hasn't been true throughout his career. He's shown stretches and flashes, like the end of last season under Kevin Ollie when he really stepped into a lead ball handling role. There were some really positive games and positive extended stretches where Cam was a willing passer and was doing a good job seeing the floor. But, this was, I think, Cam's 22nd game this season. And when you look at the numbers, Cam, I just calculated this because I wanted to obviously confirm whether or not what he said had any validity to it. And when I calculated the numbers, I wanted to look at touches to potential assists because, you can talk about assists and Cam's talking about, his teammates are making more shots now, which is resulting in more assists. So there's a way that you can look into some of that somewhat. There's always other factors that influence this stuff, but potential assists is a good way to look at it. And Cam is averaging 6.1 potential assists per game this season. If you're trying to compare that to other guards in the league, a good way to do it is to look at how many touches guards are getting. Obviously, not all touches are created equal, but if you're trying to get some sense of it, you can look at how many touches guys are getting, and you look at, how often the ratio of those touches to potential assists. How often are they getting a potential assist, creating an opportunity for their teammates compared to how much they have the ball? And I looked at the top 50 guards who are averaging, the guards that are averaging 50 or more touches per game this season. And Cam, it came out to, is averaging 1 potential assist every 9.6 touches. That was his ratio. And that ranked 71st out of 74 guards averaging over 50 touches per game this season. So obviously that's not great. Obviously that indicates, somewhat of a shot first mentality. And it's a signal that while there might be stretches where Cam is playmaking, he's not the most willing passer comparative to the rest of his peers and guards. So to me, to get a comment like this from Cam, like, I've always been doing this, I haven't changed anything, my teammates are just making shots now. First of all, it's not a great look. If I was a teammate of Cam, it's not, I don't think there's going to be any issues in the Nets locker room. I know all those guys like Cam, but it's not something that I would necessarily want to hear. Like, oh, it's on me. You're pointing the finger at other guys. It's not necessarily something you want to see from a teammate. And also, based on the stat that I just pulled, which is something I'd also calculated earlier in the season, there just seems to be some self-awareness missing here. Cam obviously has had playmaking deficiencies throughout his career. That was a reason that he slid in the draft. It was a reason why he didn't get some playing time earlier in his Nets career, whether or not you agreed with that. That along with his shot selection, along with his defense or lack thereof. And this stuff isn't just made up. Like, Cam has clearly been a shoot first guy throughout his career. His assist numbers were extremely low in college, and they've been low throughout the beginning of his NBA career. So for him to say that he's doing the same thing that he's always done and guys are just making shots now, I just think that it's a comment that I don't really agree with. And I think that there is just a little bit of a lack of self-awareness there. But not trying to completely turn this into a negative, the process has been better during this 2-game sample. It's only 2 games, but from a playmaking standpoint, it's been better. Some of it's how his defenses are playing it, but it's been good, and we'll see if Cam can continue it and build upon it. And I'm going to have a deep dive episode on Cam coming out soon, so I'm going to leave it at that for now, but I just thought that was a really interesting comment. Now I want to kind of branch out and take it around the league, the NBA, talk about some things we've seen from some familiar faces, some guys who were in Barclays Center last night. Before we do that, going to take a quick break. All right, coming back from the break, want to touch on some things around the league, some things we heard last night, and some at-large topics relating to some familiar Nets faces and former Nets. But first thing I want to touch on is Draymond Green had some comments about Karl-Anthony Towns. I know this is not Nets related, but it's something that I just wanted to comment on because there was a press conference after the Nets-Warriors game last night where Draymond was asked about some of what happened. But a little background on this: Karl-Anthony Towns missed a game for the Knicks for personal reasons earlier this week against the Warriors. And Draymond went on his podcast and said, his podcast hosted with Baron Davis, said that KAT didn't play because he was ducking Jimmy Butler. And KAT and Jimmy obviously had an issue in Minnesota back in the day. You know, Jimmy had an issue with a lot of guys on that team, it seemed like. But then it comes out that KAT was at a funeral for a family friend who had recently died of breast cancer. So he was obviously not ducking Jimmy Butler, which was a stupid comment by Draymond to begin with, because KAT had played the Heat and Jimmy Butler earlier this season, and he's played him several times since that Minnesota issue. But Draymond comes out and says that, you know, he's heard that KAT isn't playing because Jimmy's in the building, and insinuates obviously that KAT is ducking him. And then it comes out that KAT's at the funeral, and Draymond was asked for a comment at Barclays Center last night about this. And his response was interesting to say the least. I'm just going to play the clip. Here's what he had to say.
Did you see any reaction today to your comments about KAT?
No.
And are you aware of what the circumstances were?
No. No. What's the circumstance?
Apparently he said he was at a funeral for a family friend.
Oh man, that's unfortunate. I'm sorry to hear that. That sucks. But my comments that I made was what I heard was this. And that's what I heard. So I do, send my well wishes to him and his family. You know, none of us, it's inevitable. We all experience death in one way or another, and we'll all experience it in the same way one day. So it's unfortunate. You never wish that on anybody, but the Draymond Green show with Baron Davis must go on. So I definitely, wish them well and wish their family well and grieving, because we all go through that, and it's never easy for anyone. But the Draymond Green show with Baron Davis will go on.
And that comment, I don't think anybody would call a sincere apology, let alone an apology at all. And it's just something that I found extremely ridiculous, and I found extremely irresponsible, first of all, on Draymond's part, but then to hear that you're blatantly wrong, and then to not double down, but to not offer an apology and say, I was wrong on that. That's my bad, whatever. It's just terrible stuff from a guy who obviously is trying to build his, a media presence and a profile outside of just what he's doing on the basketball court in terms of his podcast. And we've heard Draymond and we've seen other players talk about this, the new media, and there's going to be players getting into media and doing all these things. And, Draymond's one of several active players, like Paul George has a podcast, which he just stopped recording because he and the 76ers have been abysmal this season. But Draymond, Pat Bev had one. Obviously, there's former players like Jeff Teague and Gilbert Arenas. And I think it's great for players to have, podcasts and do media and all things like that. And I think it adds to, the drama of the league. It adds to the fan experience. But when you're talking about something like this, where you make a wildly irresponsible statement and then it comes out that you're wrong about it in a way that's, just really insensitive and stupid all around, and you don't offer any apology, that's where, new media, like, what does that even mean? Part of being in the media is if you're going to say something like this, like somebody might have told or insinuated to Draymond that they thought that KAT was ducking Jimmy Butler. Part of being a media, part of being a journalist, whatever you want to call, is confirming things that you hear, going to multiple sources and seeing if there's any validity to what they're saying. And for Draymond just to hear this and throw that out there, and then to come out that KAT's at a funeral for a friend who just died of breast cancer, and for him to not even offer an apology, it's just Bush League stuff. It's weak. It's honestly not all that surprising from some of what we've seen from Draymond in terms of his media presence of late, but it's something that you would hope would change, and you hope that maybe players approach it differently moving forward and think about these things, and maybe have a production guy in the room with them who wants to check what they're saying before they say something as stupid as what Draymond just ran with during that podcast episode. But that's all I have on that. Moving on, I want to talk about Kyrie Irving, obviously a former Net and someone who has just been killing it with the Dallas Mavericks, and recently hurt his knee, and it was announced that he's out for the season with a torn ACL, and it just really sucks. I mean, I think obviously a lot of Nets fans have gripes with Kyrie. They probably root against Kyrie, very heavily based on what he did with the Nets and a lot of the off-court fiascos and distractions that happened with the Nets. But he's been playing so well with Dallas. And, as someone who grew up in New Jersey and has seen Kyrie play since he was in high school, I've always said, whatever disagreements I had with some of what Kyrie did here off the court, he's one of my favorite basketball players to watch. I'd go as far as saying he's my favorite basketball player to watch in the NBA, just in terms of a talent, a pure scoring, ball handling talent, a pure basketball guy who can do things on the court that nobody else can do. Like I just talked about what Steph Curry did at length and what he's been doing now into his age 36 season. And Kyrie Irving, a little bit of a different player, obviously, but on par with that level of skill. When you're talking about the most skilled guys to ever pick up a basketball, he's there. So to see him, leave the Nets and really, it seems like, get his career back on track, do away with some of the off-court distractions, some of that stuff, and, come into his own with Dallas over these last, season and a half, 2 seasons it is now, and to see him go down with the torn ACL, it's unfortunate. You never want to see someone get hurt like that, but this also adds a whole nother wrinkle because of the Luka Doncic trade, obviously, and the Mavericks situation as a whole, because the Mavericks made that Doncic trade for Anthony Davis with the thought and with the strategy in mind that they had a title contender and they had a team that could win the title right now this season, built around Kyrie and Anthony Davis. And it was a self-proclaimed 3 to 4 year window, according to Nico Harrison. And, when you talk about how this trade was already getting just destroyed by everybody across the NBA, and Mavs fans are holding mock funerals outside of American Airlines Center. There's, death threats to Nico Harrison, which is obviously terrible, but just the sheer animosity developed from the fan base because of this trade. And then Anthony Davis gets hurt his first game back, which is one of the worst things that could have happened possibly for, how this trade was viewed. And then Kyrie Irving blows out his knee and is probably out for a year and a half now. Like that's how long ACL injuries guys typically get to come back to a level of where they were playing at before, if they ever do. And as I said, for a team and a management and Nico Harrison in that Mavs front office that said, self-proclaimed 3 or 4 year window, this year is one of those years. It was probably the best year that they had in terms of these guys being, young, Anthony Davis and Kyrie Irving, younger compared to where they're heading. This year is gone. You probably have to write off next year, because the idea that Kyrie is going to come back and be playing at a championship level next year, coming off an ACL tear at, what is Kyrie going to be, 33 years old? That's kind of tough to believe. Anthony Davis is going to be 32. Then we're talking about the season after next. Kyrie is going to be 34. AD is going to be 33. They both have contract uncertainty. It's just an awful situation for the Mavericks. And I really feel for Mavs fans, because I don't think, definitely since I've been following the NBA this closely and covering the NBA, and I've heard people who have been following it for decades longer than I have, said there's no comparable situation of a fan base being this downtrodden and this enraged at management for a decision. And AD getting hurt his first game, Kyrie going down with a torn ACL, and then the Lakers also being, I think, what are they, 8-2, 9-2 since Luka Doncic joined the team. They're the 2 seed in the Western Conference right now, and they're looking like a team that can legitimately hang with some of the big dogs in the NBA. You could not have scripted a worse few months, or not a worse month. I think it's around a month now since the Luka trade. And it's all that more unbelievable because these are all self-inflicted. And this was all decisions made by Nico Harrison and Patrick Dumont and the ownership and management of that Mavericks organization. And it's something that I've never seen. And I don't know if we will see a comparable situation for much longer in the NBA. So unfortunate with the Kyrie injury, but it's just unbelievable what's happening with that Mavs team. And last thing I want to close out on is Mikal Bridges and the New York Knicks across the river, and wanted to kind of check in on how we're viewing this Mikal Bridges move. More than, 3/4 of the way into the season, we almost are now. And obviously this trade was polarizing amongst a lot of people when it happened. I think Nets fans were universally celebrating it in terms of getting 5 first-round picks, a swap, a high second-round pick for Mikal Bridges, a return that I don't think anybody ever could have imagined that they were going to get for a player. We had heard 4 first-round picks, things along that, but the Knicks obviously have the Villanova connection with Josh Hart and with Jalen Brunson. It seems like those guys pushed for it. It seems like there was a push from Mikal's end, and they get the deal done, and they egregiously overpay. But you thought, hey, they might be a top 3 team in the league. I always had an issue with the trade from the Knicks end because I think when you're giving up that much and you're really gambling what are essentially your last chips, and you're putting in a haul like that, you want to make a move that at least makes you on par with the top teams in the league, or, preferably makes you a title favorite. And I didn't think that trade did that in terms of how the Knicks stacked up against the Boston Celtics. And clearly it hasn't, because the Knicks have gotten destroyed by the Celtics in every matchup. They've also gotten destroyed by the Cavaliers. They've lost to the Thunder. Their defense, I think, is bottom 4 or 5 in the league against top 10 offenses this year. They lost last night to the Los Angeles Lakers in overtime. Jalen Brunson turns his ankle, to add insult to injury. And Mikal Bridges has not been playing good basketball for the Knicks. He scored 6 points in 43 minutes last night during that loss to the Lakers, which is honestly hard to do, to play 43 minutes in a game and score 6 points, especially for a guy who, has done the things that he's done scoring the basketball in the past. To me, I didn't get to see the whole game. I only got to see the end, but that just signals a lack of interest and a lack of assertiveness to me. He took 6 shots in 43 minutes. He's been floating through a lot of games in the past. We saw a recent loss in Boston where they got blown out by the Celtics, and Mikal, I think, had 6 or 7 points with like 2 minutes left, and then he started chucking at the very end, the last 2 minutes of the game, and got it up to like 13. But it just doesn't seem like things are going well in terms of his capability to carry an offensive load as you want to call him a co-star next to Jalen Brunson and Karl-Anthony Towns, whatever you want to call him. He's had one game scoring over 15 points since February 4th. And over the last 15 games, Mikal is averaging 13.8 points and shooting 29% from 3 on 4 attempts per game. And the Knicks are struggling. They look far from a title contender. They're obviously still a very good team, but I don't think anybody thinks that they have the defense to hang with these teams like the Boston Celtics or the Cleveland Cavaliers or the Oklahoma City Thunder, because they get torched whenever they play these guys like Tatum and whoever else, and they don't really have an answer at the point of attack. And while Mikal, I don't think anybody thought could be a guy who could shut those guys down, you hope that maybe he could do a little bit more in terms of his defensive abilities, and, with sliding into a less, heavy usage role offensively, he'd be able to get a little bit more back to the defensive player that he was in Phoenix. And it just hasn't happened. It hasn't really happened on either end. Mikal's had good stretches throughout this year, but overall he's performing like a good role player, I guess you could call it, however you want to categorize it, a decent role player. But you don't trade, 6 first-round picks or 5 first-round picks and a swap and a high second-round pick for a role player or a good role player. You trade that for great players, and Mikal has been far from that this season. I'm actually kind of surprised by not how poorly, but just the lack of production and, the way that he's floated through a lot of these games. It surprises me because obviously Mikal was floating and completely checked out during the second half of last season with the Nets struggles and his struggles being miscast as number one option. But now you come in with the Knicks, you're playing alongside your former teammates, you're playing alongside a high usage guy like Jalen Brunson, a passing and shooting big man like Karl-Anthony Towns who can spread the floor and do some of these things. I thought that he would look rejuvenated, and it really just hasn't looked anything like that, in my opinion. It has for small stretches, but it's not anything, close to, I think, what Knicks fans were hoping for in terms of Mikal's production and in terms of how this team stacks up with the rest of the teams atop the Eastern Conference and the league as a whole. So it's not looking great there. I have a lot of friends, obviously, living in the New York area who are Knicks fans, and they come to me and they say, a lot of them are saying, like, I see what Nets fans were talking about last year. I see why Nets fans were ecstatic about this trade and ecstatic about the return that they got. And for the Knicks to gamble their last chips on Mikal, you were really hoping that obviously he could carry this load and put them into that upper echelon of bona fide title contenders. And he just hasn't done it. And, for the Nets moving forward, the Knicks have limited avenues to improve with, trading all of their first round picks away. Are there some moves they could potentially make around the margin? Could they potentially look to shuffle up this roster? They could, but in terms of large, big scale moves and having outs to kind of pivot and just completely reinvent this team, it's not there. And Mikal's also entering the final year of his contract. And in terms of leverage, he kind of has them bent over a barrel because of everything that they gave up for him. So they're probably going to have to give him way more money than he's deserving of based on his production this season. So that could add another wrinkle into how they're building this team and how they're able to, make moves moving forward, their flexibility and how they're able to maneuver it and try to improve. And the Nets own, obviously, the first round picks until 2031 with picks and swaps. So we'll see how it plays out. The Knicks should be a very good team for a very long time. But in terms of getting over the hump, they're not going to do that unless Mikal Bridges raises his level of play. And up to this point, he hasn't shown an ability to do that for extended stretches of a season with the Knicks really on either end of the floor. So we'll see how that plays out there. And I'm sure, obviously, Nets fans will be monitoring it closely, as will the entire city. But that does it for this episode of Believe in Nets on the Believe Podcast Network, your one-stop shop for everything happening across the sports and entertainment world. Hope you guys really enjoyed this episode to talk about last night's game. Got to hop around the league. Not something that I do all that often, but some subjects, I think, relating to the Nets somewhat that I really wanted to touch on. As I said at the top, if you do not already, make sure you subscribe to Believe in Nets wherever you get your podcasts. Go to my YouTube channel at Erik Slater NBA. Like this video, comment if you enjoyed it, subscribe. Anything you can do to engage is much appreciated. You guys can find all of my work on ClutchPoints.com. Constant articles every day, news updates, analysis. Follow me on Twitter at Erik Slater _ as well. Interview clips, live game tweets, injury updates, all that. But Nets are on a 6-game losing streak. They're still playing some exciting basketball on a lot of nights, but the attention is really shifting, it seems like, away from a potential play-in berth and into the draft lottery. I'm going to have some draft coverage. I'm obviously going to have coverage of all the Nets games remaining and much more here on Believe in Nets. Talk to you guys soon.